My brother handed me a pristine white maid's apron on Christmas Eve and said, "Only 10 people are coming, Stella. My billionaire boss will be there, so don't embarrass me by acting like family. Just pour the wine, serve the food, and stay in the kitchen. Serving is all you're good for anyway." My own mother stood right beside him, nodding and smiling as if I were nothing but hired help. They thought they could humiliate me to climb the corporate ladder. They didn't know I had already quietly booked a one-way flight to Bali, leaving that very night. The next day, there was no food, no service, and absolutely no me. But the real chaos started when his boss arrived, looked at the empty kitchen, saw the framed family picture they forgot to hide, and went completely pale. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Stella, and at 27 years old, I finally learned exactly how much my own blood considered me worth. To my family, I wasn't a person. I was a utility. My brother Julian was always the golden boy. A textbook narcissist whose entire identity was wrapped up in corporate climbing and projecting an image of flawless, upper-class perfection. Our mother didn't just support his arrogance, she worshipped it, treating his every whim like a royal decree while treating me like an annoying afterthought. On Christmas Eve, Julian practically kicked open my door, his face flushed with a mixture of intense panic and self-importance. He didn't ask how I was doing. He simply demanded my total submission. He announced that he was hosting an ultra-exclusive Christmas dinner party the following evening. The guest list was small, only 10 people, but it included the holy grail of his corporate ambitions, his billionaire CEO boss, Mr. Sterling. Instead of asking me to join them at the table, Julian thrust a stiff white maid's apron into my hands. He looked at me with cold, evaluating eyes and said, "My boss will be there, so don't embarrass me by acting like family. You're going to serve the food, pour the wine, and stay out of sight in the kitchen. Serving is all you're good for anyway." My mother stood right behind him, nodding in eager agreement, utterly indifferent to the humiliation they were forcing upon me. They wanted a servant to impress the elite, and they expected me to play the part perfectly. I squeezed the rough fabric of the apron between my fingers, feeling the familiar sting of their rejection, but I didn't let a single tear fall. For years, I had quietly tolerated their condescending comments and emotional coldness, but this was the absolute breaking point. They looked down on me because I didn't boast about my career or flaunt my wealth, assuming my quiet lifestyle meant I was struggling and desperate. They had no earthly idea who I really was. I looked Julian dead in the eye, forced a submissive smile, and said, "Don't worry, I'll make sure tomorrow is unforgettable." The moment they left my room to celebrate their perceived victory, my submissive mask slipped away. I didn't walk into the kitchen to prep a gourmet feast for Julian's boss. Instead, I opened my laptop. For the past 3 years, I had been quietly managing high-level international investments, accumulating a massive financial cushion they knew nothing about. Within 10 minutes, I used my private funds to book a first-class one-way flight to Bali, departing late that very night. I spent the next few hours packing my entire life into 2 sleek suitcases, leaving absolutely nothing behind in the house that had felt like a prison for far too long. Just before midnight, while the house was dead silent and they were dreaming of corporate promotions, I slipped out into the freezing winter night. On the kitchen counter, I left the pristine white maid's apron completely empty. My holiday was officially beginning. By the time the afternoon sun of Christmas Day began to fade, the quiet inside the mansion was replaced by a mounting, frantic desperation. Julian and my mother woke up late, completely wrapped up in their own arrogance, fully expecting to walk downstairs into a bustling kitchen filled with the delicious aromas of a gourmet holiday feast. Instead, they stepped into a tomb of freezing, dead silence. The kitchen counters were completely bare, the expensive ingredients they had bought sat rotting inside the refrigerator, and the only thing waiting for them was the white maid's apron I had left neatly folded on the counter. Panic hit them like a physical blow as the clock ruthlessly ticked closer to the arrival of Julian's elite corporate guests. Julian's arrogance quickly shattered into pure rage, and my phone began to violently buzz with a relentless barrage of text messages and calls. At first, his texts were viciously aggressive, filled with caps lock threats about how I was ruining his life, destroying his career, and how he would make me pay for this betrayal. But as the hours slipped away and the reality of his situation set in, his tone crumbled into pathetic, desperate begging. He pleaded with me to come back, promising he would pay me whatever I wanted if I just saved his dinner. I didn't read a single word. Miles away, lounging comfortably in the exclusive, quiet warmth of the airport lounge, I turned my phone on silent, took a slow sip of complimentary champagne, and watched the runway. I was completely out of their reach. The front doorbell rang precisely at 6 o'clock, sounding like a death knell through the silent, empty house. Julian, his expensive designer suit already soaked through with anxious sweat, practically tripped over his own feet as he ran to answer it. Standing on the porch was Mr. Sterling, looking every bit the commanding billionaire tycoon, flanked by 3 of his top executive vice presidents. They stepped into the grand foyer, fully expecting to be greeted by the warm hospitality, elegant music, and rich holiday aromas of an elite, meticulously managed family celebration. Instead, they were met with an awkward, freezing stillness that made the entire house feel completely abandoned. Julian's face twisted into a desperate, theatrical grin as he frantically launched into a clumsy cover-up. He lied through his teeth, stammering that their professional catering staff had suffered a catastrophic vehicle accident on the icy roads, forcing them to pivot their plans at the very last second. He practically forced expensive glasses of scotch into the executives' hands, trying to distract them by aggressively pitching his latest marketing ideas. But no amount of fast talking could hide the glaring reality. The atmosphere in the living room quickly grew suffocatingly tense and uncomfortable. My mother fluttered around the edges of the room like a nervous ghost, offering tiny plates of stale, store-bought crackers while trying to echo Julian's pathetic excuses. The executive team exchanged highly skeptical, amused looks as they sat on the pristine furniture, listening to the hollow echo of Julian's voice. His carefully calculated presentation of a flawless high society lifestyle was completely crumbling right before his eyes, turning his biggest career opportunity into a public nightmare. Desperate to break the suffocating silence, Julian began pacing around the room, guiding Mr. Sterling toward the fireplace mantel to showcase his expensive art pieces. But as the billionaire's eyes swept across the shelf, they bypassed the luxury trinkets and froze directly on a small, dusty silver frame tucked away in the very back. It was an old family photograph from my college graduation, one that Julian and my mother had completely forgotten to hide before the guests arrived. Mr. Sterling went entirely rigid. The casual indifference vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden, striking paleness that made his executive team stop talking instantly. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached out, picked up the frame, and stared intensely at my face in the picture. He turned slowly toward Julian, his voice carrying a dangerous, commanding weight that echoed through the quiet room. "Who is this woman?" he demanded. Julian, completely misreading the boss's shock and assuming Mr. Sterling was annoyed by a messy personal detail, let out a forced, nervous laugh. He quickly tried to minimize the situation, waving his hand dismissively as if I were nothing but a minor inconvenience. "Oh, please ignore that, Mr. Sterling," Julian said, his voice dripping with his usual condescension. "That's just my ungrateful younger sister, Stella. She's honestly a nobody in this family, just a bitter, low-level servant who completely abandoned her duties and walked out on us today. She has absolutely nothing to do with my career or my professional life, I assure you." My mother nodded eagerly from the corner, smiling as Julian successfully threw me under the bus. Mr. Sterling's jaw clenched so tightly the veins in his neck visibly pulsed, his eyes boring into Julian with absolute disgust. The room felt completely ice-cold as the billionaire set the frame down with a deliberate, echoing thud. "A low-level servant?" Mr. Sterling whispered, his voice dangerously calm. He turned to his executives, who looked just as shocked, before looking back at my terrified brother. "Julian, you are an absolute fool. The woman in this photograph is Stella Whitaker, the lead venture capitalist of Vanguard Holdings. She is the elusive benefactor who single-handedly funded my entire tech empire last year." Julian stumbled backward, his hand catching the edge of the desk as his breath hitched. My mother's hands began to shake so violently she dropped her wineglass, sending red liquid splattering across the pristine white rug. Mr. Sterling didn't even blink at the mess. He explained that Stella owned the controlling shares in his corporation, making her his ultimate boss. "I didn't accept this dinner invitation because of your pathetic marketing pitches, Julian," Mr. Sterling revealed, his voice dripping with pure contempt. "I accepted because I noticed you shared her last name, and I spent weeks hoping you could grant me a formal introduction to her. But instead of a brilliant financial partner, I find out she lives with a pair of arrogant, abusive parasites who treat her like hired help." Julian tried to speak, but no sound came out of his mouth, as the reality of his catastrophic mistake completely paralyzed him. Mr. Sterling didn't waste another second. He turned on his heel and walked out of the house, his executives following closely behind him in total silence. The very next morning, Julian received a formal email stating that his upcoming promotion was permanently revoked, his contract was terminated, and he was blacklisted from the entire industry. He was professionally ruined. Meanwhile, I woke up to the gentle sound of ocean waves in my luxury villa in Bali, the warm, tropical sun kissing my face. When I finally turned on my phone, it exploded with dozens of frantic, crying voicemails from my mother and brother. Their arrogance was completely gone, replaced by pathetic begging for financial forgiveness and rescue from the massive debts Julian now faced. I simply deleted the messages and blocked their numbers forever. They wanted a servant, so I left them to clean up their own mess. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you have left the apron on the counter, or would you have stayed to watch the boss expose them in person? Comment below with the city you are watching from. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.